if you will give us a little bit, as you start off with just a bit of a background about debit orders, just take us through a basic process. I'm sure you've prepared something for this. And then I'm going to just hop in with questions and I'll ask and guide the conversation as we go if that format works for you.
That's absolutely fine, Roelof. So I'm not going to overcomplicate things because DebiCheck is not as complicated as people make it out to be. DebiCheck is actually a very straightforward system that was designed with the purpose of people not reversing or disputing debit orders like they used to in the past. So just before we start, I'm sure many of you guys are familiar, with the old debit orders that were used to be known as NADO, which was your non-authenticated debit orders. And those debit orders predominantly were used right across the board by the banks, insurance companies, absolutely anyone who wanted to place a debit order on your account used to use the non-authenticated method of debit orders. And the problem that we faced with that is, yes, it is something that we also offered, but we also had another authenticated debit order we used to use that was called ADO. But where it became complicated is due to the amount of fraud, as well as consumers just stopping and reversing debit orders left, right, and center, where PASA and BASA, believe it or not, actually came together. I'm not too sure if you know, PASA is the Payment Association of South Africa, and BASA is the Banking Association of South Africa. So these chaps came together and decided, listen, we need something that is going to cater for each and every business, be it whether you run an online business and you don't see your customer, where your customer is sitting in Timbuktu and you may be sitting in Johannesburg. We need a facility that can facilitate, authenticate the debit orders for those guys, and also for the guy who has walk-in traffic into his store or shop. And that was basically where DebiCheck was born, in a nutshell, right? So DebiCheck was started with the intention of basically stopping the abuse of debit orders first and foremost. There was a stage in South Africa, I'm not too sure if you guys are familiar, where we had the 99 Rand debit order scams going off your accounts and the bank doesn't notify you and you don't pay attention to it. And these guys were making millions upon millions with people. So DebiCheck was brought in to put a stop to that, but DebiCheck was also brought in to basically stop not only the consumer, but the provider as well, which means you guys with your businesses that's using your hard-earned cash to basically loan out and basically make a living and a business from this, right? And DebiCheck works on a basic, simple front. Now, a customer has to authenticate this debit order. And there's one of a few ways that a customer can actually authenticate a DebiCheck mandate, which is the first one, which is the most simplest one, is normally via SMS, a USSD. So you set up the mandate, the customer get the notification on their cell phone. They can either decline or accept that mandate. They can also accept that mandate via ATM, online banking, or by calling the call center of the bank. So there's many ways for them to actually accept these mandates. Now, on the back of that, with you doing the business that you are, there's one of two ways that you can basically facilitate or initiate this mandate. So once you set up the mandate on the Quinn Pay system, you can either do a DebiCheck TT1 immediate transaction with the customer, where the customer will get immediate notification and they have about less than a minute to accept that mandate. All right. So the customer will be sitting in front of you, message will pop up on his phone, boom, he accepts it or declines it, you're good to proceed. The other way for the customer to accept it is by delayed. So on that day, they have until about 10 o'clock at night to accept that mandate. So initially, you won't be paying out that customer necessarily the same day that loan, because you have to wait until they basically accept that loan or that mandate before you can complete that transaction. All right. Now, here's where the interesting part actually comes in. With DebiCheck, we find that a lot of queries from our providers out there actually come when the customer's sitting in front of them. They're trying to load that DebiCheck mandate on a customer, but they're getting an error. And these errors can mean one of a few things. I'll send everyone a list out. Roelof, I'm not too sure if you have that list. I'll send it through to you, and it will just be a transactional list of all the DebiCheck errors that you can get and what it actually means. Now, the most common one that people actually get is that the cell phone number will be invalid. All right. So the guy sitting in front of you, the consumer, has not updated his contact details with his bank. He's sitting, you doing the loan. Everything's fine. Credit check, affordability check is done. It's time to process this mandate, and you're getting an error from DebiCheck saying, no, hold on. This thing is not going through because the information that you captured on the system that is sent through to the bank does not match the information that's sitting with the bank of this consumer. So there's a dispute in information here. You're definitely going to get an error on that DebiCheck mandate, and you then need to see what that error is. So there is a list on our side for you to see exactly what the problem might be with that consumer.